Shadow of captivity. Dominic Reed had killed before, not because he wanted to, but because war had demanded it. His nightmares were filled with faces, soldiers, civilians, and one child who had died when his unit couldn't evacuate fast enough during the Proxima siege. He'd counted each death until the numbers blurred together like stars seen through tears. After the Solarian peace treaty, he'd walked away from the military carrying ghosts on his shoulders. The underground market on Zenith 9 stank of sweat, synthetic drugs, and desperation. The locals called it the Pit, a place where morality came to drown in profit. Its tunnels burrowed beneath the planet's crystalline surface, filled with stalls selling everything from black market tech to living beings. Dominic hadn't come to buy. He tracked Jackson Holt, the man responsible for the slaughter of 20 civilians during the Proxima cleanup, to this festering wound of a marketplace. Intelligence suggested Holt had established himself as a flesh trader here. The weapon in Dominic's coat pocket was meant for him, not for commerce. But then he saw her. The auction block stood at the center of the largest chamber, illuminated by harsh violet lights. The auctioneer, a creature with too many eyes and not enough conscience, gestured toward a being so still she might have been stone rather than flesh. Next lot, Viridian female, telepath class. Excellent condition, prime breeding age, fully conditioned for obedience. She stood with her head bowed, emerald-tinged skin shimmering under the lights. Her hair fell in platinum waves to her waist, partially obscuring her face. But what struck Dominic wasn't her beauty, it was her stillness. Not the stillness of peace, but of something broken and rebuilt wrong. Starting bid at 30,000 credits, the auctioneer called. A hand went up, then another. Dominic watched as men and aliens alike bid on her life as if purchasing furniture. He moved closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. When he was near enough to see her face, she raised her eyes, deep violet, luminous, and utterly devoid of hope. She looked at him not with fear or hatred, but with an exhausted acceptance that chilled him more than rage ever could. Sold to the gentleman in black for 55,000. The auctioneer's voice cut through Dominic's thoughts. He realized with a start that his hand had raised of its own accord. What had he done? Well, buying pets now, Reed? The voice slithered from the shadows like an oil slick. Jackson Holt, older but unmistakable, with his scarred lip and cold eyes. Never thought I'd see you here. Dominic's hand twitched toward his weapon. It would be so easy, one shot. But the girl, the slave he'd just purchased, was watching him with those empty violet eyes. She's Viridian, Holt continued, misinterpreting Dominic's silence. Telepathic species, this one's special, high empathic rating, pure genetic line. Previous owners used her as an emotional amplifier. Hook her up to the right equipment and she'll make you feel whatever you want. Pleasure, pain, it's quite the ride. Dominic's stomach turned. Viridians were peaceful. Before the war, they'd been respected as healers and mediators, their natural empathic abilities making them invaluable in diplomatic circles. Now they were nearly extinct, hunted for abilities that had become commodities. How much? Dominic asked, voice steady despite the rage building inside him. Holt laughed. She's already yours unless you want upgrades, the control implant package costs. Not her, Dominic interrupted. You, how much to walk away from this place? Understanding darkened Holt's features. You're not here to shop. No. Holt's hand moved for his weapon, but Dominic was faster. The stunner in his palm discharged with a soft whine. Holt collapsed, twitching. Security's coming, Dominic muttered, retrieving the credentials and payment chip from the unconscious man. He approached the Viridian woman who hadn't moved. We need to go. She didn't respond, but when he gestured for her to follow, she did, silent as a shadow. They moved through the market, past stalls of contraband and misery. No one stopped them. In the pit, ownership was everything, and she was now his property. Outside, the twin moons of Zenith 9 hung low in the polluted sky. Dominic's ship waited at a private docking bay, a modest transport vessel that had once been military before he'd modified it for civilian life. The Viridian woman followed him aboard without hesitation. In the ship's light, he could see the control collar around her slender neck, a cruel device that suppressed her natural abilities and administered pain if she disobeyed. Sit, he said, gesturing to the co-pilot's chair. She complied instantly. Dominic initiated the launch sequence, guilt gnawing at him. He hadn't come to buy a slave. He'd come to eliminate a war criminal. Yet here he was, with a traumatized Viridian who probably expected him to torture her for entertainment. As the ship broke atmosphere, he glanced at her. "I'm Dominic Reed. Do you have a name?" For a long moment she didn't respond. Then so softly he almost missed it. "Neva." "Neva," he repeated, tasting the name. "I'm not going to hurt you." Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in those violet eyes. Not hope, but perhaps confusion. "I didn't plan to buy anyone today," he continued, "but I couldn't leave you there." "What do you require of me?" Her voice was smooth, melodic, but devoid of emotion, the voice of someone who had learned that feelings were dangerous. "Nothing," Dominic said firmly. "Absolutely nothing." She studied him, the first real reaction he'd seen. All owners want something. "I'm not your owner." The words came out harsher than he intended. He sighed, running a hand through his short brown hair. "That collar, can it be removed?" A flicker of fear crossed her face. "It is permanent. Removal attempts trigger the pain circuits." Dominic's jaw tightened. "We'll see about that." He set course for his home on Viridia's edge, a remote planet named for the Viridian refugees who'd briefly settled there before disappearing. The irony wasn't lost on him. As stars streaked past the view screen, Dominic wondered what he'd gotten himself into. He'd failed to complete his mission. Holt was alive, merely stunned. The man would recover and disappear again, taking his secrets with him. But looking at Neva, her hands folded in her lap, back straight as a rod, he couldn't regret his choice. "Why did you buy me?" she asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Dominic considered lying, then decided against it. "I recognize something in you." "What?" The look of someone who survived things they shouldn't have had to. She turned to face him fully for the first time. "You are not what I expected." "No," he agreed, meeting her gaze. "I'm guessing most humans you've met haven't been kind." The ghost of a bitter smile touched her lips. "Kindness is rarely profitable." In that moment, something passed between them, a recognition deeper than words. Two survivors adrift in a universe that had shown them its worst. As the ship sailed through the darkness, Dominic made a silent promise. Whatever happened next, Neva would never be property again. Fragile trust. The descent to Viridia's edge was smooth, the ship parting perpetual mist as it approached Dominic's isolated home. Built into the cliff face overlooking a vast turquoise ocean, the structure blended with the natural stone, making it nearly invisible from above, exactly as he'd intended when he'd purchased the abandoned outpost years ago. As the landing gear touched down, Neva watched through the viewport, her face carefully composed but her eyes revealing flickers of surprise. No sprawling city, no compound filled with guards, just wilderness and solitude. This was not what captivity usually looked like. "We're here," Dominic announced, powering down the systems. He glanced at her, nodding the rigid control she maintained over every movement. "It's not much, but it's quiet." Neva said nothing, following him with silent steps as he led her from the ship along a narrow stone path. Wind carried the scent of salt and strange flowering vines that clung to the rocky terrain. The distant crash of waves against the cliff base created a rhythmic backdrop. The entrance to Dominic's home opened with a biometric scan, revealing a surprisingly warm interior carved from the same stone as the cliff. Soft amber lighting illuminated living spaces with simple, comfortable furnishings. Large windows faced the ocean, currently obscured by evening mist. "Kitchen's through there," he gestured. "Bathrooms down the hall. You can have the guest room, second door on the left." He paused, aware of her stillness. "You're not locked in. The security system is to keep others out, not to keep you in." Neva's gaze moved methodically, assessing exits, scanning for threats. "What am I expected to do here?" "Recover," Dominic said simply. "Rest. The replicator can make whatever food you want." She stared at him, confusion evident in the slight furrow of her brow. "I don't understand." "I know," Dominic sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I'm going to be straight with you. I was a captain in the Solarian forces during the war. I did things I'm not proud of. Buying you, it wasn't planned, but I couldn't leave you there." "Why?" The question held genuine bewilderment. Dominic looked away, unable to meet those piercing violet eyes. "Because I've seen enough people treated like property." He moved to a cabinet built into the wall and withdrew a small metal case. "This is a neural dampener. It should neutralize your collar without triggering the pain sensors. If you want, I can try to disable it." Neva's hand moved reflexively to the collar, her fingers tracing its smooth surface. Previous owners said removal was impossible. Previous owners wanted to keep you controlled, Dominic countered. I'm offering a choice, yes or no, it's up to you. Wariness crept across her features, and if I refuse, then the collar stays until you decide otherwise. Minutes passed in silence, the only sound the distant waves and the soft hum of the home systems. Finally, Neva inclined her head slightly. You may try. Dominic approached slowly, holding the device where she could see it. This will create a localized field that should interrupt the collar's programming. It might feel strange, but it shouldn't hurt. He activated the dampener, watching as blue light pulsed across its surface. Cautiously, he placed it against the collar. Neva stiffened, eyes widening as the metal around her neck emitted a series of soft clicks before splitting open, falling to the floor with a dull thud. For a moment, neither moved. Then Neva gasped, her hands flying to her neck. Without the collar's suppression, her natural abilities surged back, the sudden flood of sensory information overwhelming her. She swayed, and Dominic caught her arm to steady her. Easy, he murmured. It'll take time to adjust. What happened next was so fast he barely registered it. One moment he was supporting her, the next he was slammed against the wall, invisible force pinning him in place. Neva stood before him, eyes glowing with violet energy, her platinum hair floating as if underwater. 8 years, she whispered, her voice layered with power. 8 years of collars and cages and pain. Dominic didn't struggle. I understand. You understand nothing, she hissed. Do you know what they did to me, what they made me feel, what they made me do? No, he admitted, but I know what it's like to be used as a weapon. Her power faltered momentarily. Why should I believe you won't be the same? I can't prove that, Dominic said quietly. All I can offer is choice. Kill me if you want, take the ship, I won't stop you. The pressure against his chest increased for a heartbeat, then vanished. Neva stumbled backward, the glow fading from her eyes as she collapsed to her knees, trembling. I can't, she whispered. I can feel everything, your guilt, your regret, your pity. The last word was spat like poison. Dominic approached cautiously, kneeling before her but not touching. Not pity, recognition. Neva looked up, face haunted. I haven't been free in so long, I don't remember how. Neither do I, he confessed. That night, Neva stood in the guest room, running her fingers along unfamiliar surfaces. Soft bedding, books made of actual paper, a window that opened to the night air. There were no restraints, no monitoring devices, no locked doors, just space and silence. She sat on the edge of the bed, feeling its give beneath her weight. Without the collar, her mind reached outward instinctively, sensing the emotional currents around her. The house itself seemed to hold memories, some peaceful, others sharp with regret. And Dominic. His presence was a complex storm of emotions, currently muted by distance and the wall between them. Neva closed her eyes, remembering the moment the collar had released. The sudden rush of sensation had been overwhelming, years of suppressed abilities flooding back at once. She had felt his surprise, his guilt, his determination not to harm her. But beneath those immediate emotions lay deeper currents. Old shame, responsibility for deaths he couldn't prevent, a profound loneliness that mirrored her own. She could have killed him. Part of her had wanted to, not out of hatred for him specifically, but for what his kind had done to hers. Yet she hadn't. Because alongside his dark emotions, she'd sensed something rare, genuine concern, not for what she could do for him, but for her as a being with worth. A sound drew her attention, gentle rain beginning to fall outside, droplets striking the roof in a soothing rhythm. Neva moved to the window, pushing it open further to breathe in the clean, damp air. How long had it been since she'd felt rain? Since she'd made a choice as simple as opening a window? In the living area, Dominic sat with a glass of amber liquid, staring out at the misty darkness. He felt her presence before he saw her, a subtle shift in the air, the sensation of being observed. Couldn't sleep, he asked without turning. Neva stepped into view, her movements more fluid now, less constrained. I haven't tried yet. She approached slowly, studying him. You're afraid of me. Cautious, he corrected. There's a difference. But you removed my collar knowing what I could do. Dominic nodded. Everyone deserves freedom, even if it's dangerous. She considered this, head tilted slightly. During the war, did you ever encounter Viridians? Pain flickered across his features. Once, on Proxima Centauri, there was a settlement, civilians mostly. We were ordered to secure the area. He stopped, taking a deep swallow of his drink. They died, Neva stated, not a question. Not all, but enough. Dominic's gaze remained fixed on the darkness beyond the window. I requested transfer afterward. They called it combat stress. I called it conscience. Neva moved closer, her reflection appearing in the glass beside his. I can feel your regret. It pulses like a wound. Does that satisfy you? He asked, finally looking at her. No, she said softly. Suffering never does, not yours, not mine. The admission hung between them, an unexpected bridge across their differences. Dominic set down his glass and stood, facing her fully. Tomorrow, I'll show you the perimeter, the security systems. You should know how everything works if you decide to stay. And if I don't, then I'll provision the smaller shuttle for you. Enough supplies and credits to get wherever you want to go. Neva studied him, sensing no deception. Why would you do that? Dominic's expression softened slightly, because freedom isn't just about removing collars. Later, as the rain intensified, Neva returned to her room. She didn't sleep immediately, instead sitting cross-legged on the bed, practicing the mental exercises her people had taught children to control their abilities. Without the collar's suppression, her mind reached eagerly, hungrily, beyond the walls of the room. She felt the nocturnal creatures hunting in the mist, their simple emotions bright and sharp. She sensed the rhythmic peace of the ocean, ancient and patient. And she felt Dominic, his consciousness a complex tangle of memory and emotion, eventually settling into the quieter patterns of sleep. For the first time in 8 years, Neva closed her eyes not out of exhaustion or fear, but because she chose to. Freedom, she was discovering, began with the smallest of choices. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.